The afternoon in a small town felt unusually quiet and tense. The once peaceful neighborhood now had a stranger among them. It was a black man named James, who had recently moved into a small house at the end of the street. James didn't draw much attention, but to some prejudiced people, his presence immediately became the focus of rumors. 3 police officers, Rick, Tom, and Stephen, all of whom were white, held deeply rooted prejudices against black people. They did not trust James, even though they had no clear reason beyond the color of his skin. Rick was the most conservative, with many years in the police force, and always believed that black people were often involved in crime. Tom and Stephen were less prejudiced than Rick, but Rick's influence made them wary of James as well. "Have you noticed?" Rick began as the 3 of them sat in a cafe near the police station. "That black guy, he just moved in, and there's definitely something wrong with him." Tom shrugged but also showed agreement. "I haven't seen him talk to anyone in the neighborhood. He keeps to himself." Stephen added, his voice full of suspicion. "Do you think he might be involved with a gang? I heard he brought a lot of luggage. Looked like he was running away from something." Without evidence or legitimate reason, they based their distrust solely on prejudice. These thoughts were not just discussed in the cafe but gradually became their primary concern in the days that followed. Rick suggested they should keep an eye on James to see if he made any suspicious moves. Day by day, Rick, Tom, and Stephen watched James from a distance, hoping to catch something suspicious. But James remained calm, quiet, and private. He only went out when necessary and didn't socialize much with his neighbors, which further fueled the officers' suspicions. One evening, as night had fallen and no one was around, Rick felt it was the right time to check out James's house. With reckless enthusiasm and discriminatory prejudice, he urged Tom and Stephen to break into James's house to search for evidence. "We don't need any warrant," Rick said, his voice determined. "We just need to take a quick look to make sure he's not up to anything illegal." Tom and Stephen, though a bit hesitant, eventually agreed with Rick. They approached James's house quietly, trying not to make any noise. Rick used a flashlight to light their way as they moved towards the back door of the house. All 3 wore gloves and carried batons, prepared for whatever situation might arise. Rick carefully pushed the door open and realized it was unlocked. "He's foolish for not locking his door," he chuckled softly, taking it as proof of James's carelessness. They sneaked into the house, the flashlight illuminating the items in the small, neat living room. They began to split up to check different rooms, searching for anything that could serve as evidence. Tom found a laptop on the table and immediately began rifling through the papers on the desk. Stephen was searching the drawers, trying to see if there were any weapons or contraband. Rick, feeling self-satisfied, walked into James's bedroom. The room was clean, tidy, and showed no suspicious signs. But Rick wasn't willing to admit he was wrong. "We'll find something," he muttered to himself, as the 3 officers were engrossed in searching. The front door suddenly opened. James stepped in, carrying a bag of groceries. He was briefly surprised to see the flickering flashlights coming from different rooms in his house, and immediately understood that he was being intruded upon. Calm and composed, James showed no sign of panic. He stood his ground, his deep but firm voice echoing, "What are you doing in my house?" The 3 officers were startled at the sound of James's voice. They turned around and saw him standing there, calm and without a hint of fear. Tom forced an awkward smile and said, "We were just checking to make sure nothing was wrong." James crossed his arms, his eyes sharp as they met each of theirs. "You broke into my house without a warrant. Do you know that what you're doing is illegal?" Rick, though a bit uneasy, maintained his arrogant attitude. "We're just doing our job. Many people around here are concerned about your presence." James nodded, not reacting to Rick's harsh words. He invited the 3 officers to sit down on the couch in the living room and said, "If you want to talk, let's do it properly. I can explain everything." The 3 officers felt uneasy, but with no other choice, They reluctantly sat down. James sat opposite them, still maintaining his calm and tolerant demeanor. In the quiet of the room, James began to speak, his voice calm but resolute. Do you realize that your actions are not only a violation of my personal rights, but also an act of racial discrimination? The three officers were silent, none daring to respond. James continued, I am James Miller, a senior FBI agent. I'm here on an important mission, and I had hoped not to face situations like this. James's words hit Rick, Tom, and Stephen like a shockwave. They couldn't believe that the man they had suspected and mistreated was actually a high-ranking agent, someone with great authority and responsibility. All three hung their heads, shame rising within them. James began telling them about the major cases he had been involved in, the dangers he had faced, and the silent sacrifices he had made for his country. I didn't choose my skin color, but I chose to live my life dedicated to justice, he said, his voice filled with determination. Rick tried to say something in defense, but the words wouldn't come. Tom and Stephen also felt confused and regretful. Their prejudice and racism seemed to crumble piece by piece as they listened to James's story. Instead of reacting as I have every right to, James continued, I want you to understand that compassion and tolerance are not signs of weakness. They are the only way to overcome hatred and build a better world. Rick, Tom, and Stephen sat there, silent in their shame and remorse. They couldn't believe that someone like James could remain calm and forgiving after having his privacy violated and being treated unfairly. Finally, James looked into their eyes and said, I forgive you, but I hope you will change. Not for me, but for yourselves and for those you serve. James's words were like light illuminating the dark corners of the officers' souls. They began to realize that instead of judging others by appearances, they needed to learn to understand and appreciate the value of every human being. The atmosphere in the room remained tense after James revealed his identity. The three officers, Rick, Tom, and Stephen, sat in silence, trying to process what they had just heard. The stories and experiences James shared as a senior FBI agent began to shake their perceptions. James gently placed his hand on the table, his eyes calm but filled with deep, unspoken emotions. He looked at each of them and said, I know that racial prejudice isn't easy to erase, especially when it's been ingrained for so long. But you need to understand that skin color never defines a person. Rick, the most stubborn of the three, suddenly felt a stir in his heart. He maintained a stern expression, but deep down, James's words filled him with shame. He recalled his years as an officer, always judging and suspecting the black people he met. He never thought that his racism could have influenced his decisions and actions as much as it had. James told them about times he had been treated unfairly, even at work. He spoke about a time when his colleagues doubted him when he was promoted because of his skin color. They couldn't accept that I got to this position through hard work and talent, James said pensively. They always assumed I got it because of a policy or out of pity. Tom and Stephen listened, not daring to look James in the eyes. His words cut into their pride like a knife. They realized that they had always judged others without understanding their lives, the pain they had to endure just because of the color of their skin. James stood up and walked over to the small bookshelf in the corner of the living room. He pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table in front of the three officers. These are documents from the cases I've worked on, about the criminals I've stopped to protect this society, he said firmly. I've risked my life countless times to keep everyone safe, including you. Rick frowned, feeling uncomfortable. In his mind, James's image slowly shifted from that of a stranger he distrusted to someone responsible and courageous. Tom flipped through the pages of the folder, reading lines that described the missions James had completed. He saw photos of James in his FBI uniform, standing alongside other agents, facing dangerous criminals. How can you do all this and still remain so forgiving? Stephen spoke up without thinking, his eyes filled with a mix of admiration and curiosity. James smiled. Forgiving is not easy, but I learned that forgiveness can free people from resentment. You may think forgiveness is weakness, but in fact, it is the greatest strength a person can have. James shared that he was not only an FBI agent but also a son, a father, and a husband. My family taught me that love and compassion are the most important values. I work not just out of duty but also out of responsibility to my family, to my community, and to those around me. Tom, feeling moved, said softly, I never thought someone like you could have such compassion. James looked deeply into each of their eyes and said, If I can forgive those who have hurt me, then why can't I forgive you? I understand that racism has existed in this society for a very long time, but I believe it can be erased little by little, starting with each one of us. He spoke about his journey, about the times he was rejected, humiliated, and even attacked because of his skin color. There were nights when I questioned whether I should give up, but then I realized that if I let go, I would be letting injustice win. Rick, who had always held on to his prejudices, finally felt his heart soften. He realized that his hatred and biases were unfounded. What he thought about James before was completely wrong. Maybe we were wrong to think that all black people were bad, Rick admitted, his voice full of regret. We let our prejudices blind us. James nodded, smiling gently. I don't expect you to change overnight, but I hope that through my story, you can understand that prejudice only makes us smaller and limits our potential. James continued recounting the painful memories he had endured throughout his life. When I was young, I saw my parents being treated unfairly just because they were black, he said, his eyes distant as he recalled those painful memories. They were denied housing, humiliated while shopping, and even refused medical care when my mother was seriously ill. James's story left the three officers stunned. They had never thought that black people had to endure such injustice simply because of their skin color. Those experiences haunted me and made me determined to change my life. I wanted to prove that skin color does not determine a person's worth. He spoke of the hardships he had to overcome to become an FBI agent. I had to study twice as hard, work tirelessly, and endure harsh words from people who never believed in me simply because I was black. But I didn't give up, and that is why I'm here today, talking to you. Tom bowed his head, his eyes glistening with tears. He remembered the times he had treated black people poorly while patrolling his area. Now, he felt regret and shame for his actions. James looked at them, his eyes free of resentment. You can change if you truly want to. I believe change starts with the smallest actions, with sincerity and determination. Rick, Tom, and Stephen sat there, feeling a sense of relief as they listened to James's heartfelt words. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but they also realized that it was their responsibility to break down prejudices and build a community free of discrimination. James ended his story, looking at the three officers with empathy and hope. If I can change, so can you. All you need is the courage to face yourselves and the willingness to accept differences. Rick, Tom, and Stephen nodded silently, feeling that this encounter had opened a new chapter in their lives, a chapter no longer clouded by prejudice and resentment. After recounting the hardships and injustices he had endured, James sat quietly for a moment, letting his words sink deeply into the minds of the three officers. He understood that it wasn't easy for them to accept, but he believed that compassion could change everything. James turned to look at Rick, Tom, and Stephen, then gently said, Compassion is not an easy thing to practice, especially when you are used to thinking negatively about others. But it is compassion that has helped me overcome so much pain and keep my faith in humanity. He spoke about the times he forgave those who had hurt him, and how compassion had helped him avoid becoming a person full of hatred and negativity. I never allowed those who hated me to control my life. Instead, I chose to forgive and move forward. That is how I keep peace in my heart. Rick looked at James with admiration and a hint of shame. He felt that James's words were deeply affecting his heart. For the first time in his life, Rick felt he had truly been wrong in judging a person based on their appearance alone. "So you forgive everyone who has ever hurt you?" Rick asked in disbelief, as if unable to accept what he had just heard. James nodded. "Yes, I forgive, not for them, but for myself. Forgiveness frees me from hatred and suffering. It is a way for me to keep my heart pure and not be burdened by negativity." Tom also began to feel moved. He remembered the times he had doubted and looked down on black people he met, simply because he had been influenced by the prejudices passed down from his family and society. "I really don't know what to say. I never thought compassion could be so powerful," Tom said, his voice trembling. James's words were like light illuminating the dark corners of the three officers' souls. Gradually, they realized that their lives had been driven by prejudices they didn't fully understand. What James said about compassion and forgiveness served as a mirror, reflecting back at them the things they had done and the way they perceived others. Rick, who had always been proud of his work and often carried an arrogant attitude, now felt small and foolish. He had thought himself entitled to judge others. But in reality, he was just someone influenced by baseless hatred. James saw the awakening in their eyes, and he knew that this was a significant step forward in the lives of these three men. He said, "I don't expect you to change overnight, but I hope you will at least think about what we've discussed today." Stephen, the most reserved and least expressive of the three, suddenly spoke up. "James, thank you. Thank you for not seeking revenge against us. Instead, you took the time to help us understand, to help us see ourselves clearly." James nodded. "I do this not just for you, but for a society I hope for, a society without discrimination, where everyone has the opportunity to live with dignity and be respected." The three officers sat there, deep in thought, feeling a change beginning within them. They started to realize that, sometimes, to truly understand a person, you have to step away from the stereotypes and prejudices you've held on to. The conversation continued for several more hours, and the three officers gradually gained a deeper understanding of James's life, character, and compassion. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, they felt an overwhelming need to sincerely apologize to James. Rick stood up, bowed his head, and said, "James, I am truly sorry for what we did. We were wrong to let our prejudices control us, and I know that my apology cannot erase the harm we caused. But I am genuinely remorseful and hope that you can forgive us." Tom and Stephen also bowed their heads along with Rick, echoing their apologies. They knew this was a defining moment in their lives, a moment to begin letting go of their misguided beliefs and to start anew. James smiled, a simple smile filled with empathy. "You don't need to apologize so much. Sometimes we need mistakes to learn and grow. The important thing is that you have recognized your wrongdoing and are willing to change." James accepted their apologies sincerely, without any resentment or bitterness. He knew that forgiveness not only helped those who made mistakes find peace but also helped him keep his own heart at peace. James extended his hand to each of the officers. "I forgive you," he said, his eyes filled with trust. "But I also hope you will fulfill your promise. Change is not just about words. It needs to be shown through everyday actions." The three officers shook James's hand firmly, feeling the warmth and sincerity in his handshake. It was not just a simple gesture but also a confirmation of their commitment to themselves and to James, that they would change. Rick, Tom, and Stephen knew that their lives would no longer be the same after this encounter. They felt lighter and more at peace than ever before, as if an invisible burden had been lifted. James's forgiveness not only freed them from guilt but also opened a new door, a chance to start over and live a life no longer haunted by prejudice and bias. James added, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to accept and live better. I hope you will always remember this moment and let it be a motivation for change within you." The three officers nodded, their eyes full of determination. They knew that James's forgiveness was not easily given, and they felt even more grateful to him. Deep down, they resolved never to let prejudice and hatred influence their work or lives again. As the conversation ended, James and the three officers walked outside together. The gentle morning light shone down. Like a sign of new hope, the sky was clear, and the wind blew softly, as if nature itself were witnessing this important moment. That morning, as the sunlight began to spread across the neighborhood, the three officers, Rick, Tom, and Stephen, felt as if they had crossed a new threshold in their lives. The prejudices and mistaken beliefs seemed to have gently faded away, leaving them with a sense of lightness and peace. Rick was the first to speak, as if to break the silence after they left James's house. "I never thought I could change in just one night like this," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I used to believe that my prejudices were right, but now I see I was wrong." Tom and Stephen nodded, their eyes glistening with hope and determination. They felt awakened, and in their hearts, a strong desire arose to correct the mistakes of their past. "From now on, I want to be a better officer, not judging others based on their skin color or background," Tom said firmly. Stephen sighed and added, "We were lucky to have the opportunity to recognize our mistakes, and I think that's a blessing. I don't want to keep living in the darkness of hatred and prejudice." Before parting ways, the three officers made a commitment to each other that from today on, they would live and work with a more open attitude, respecting and understanding those around them. They were not just making a promise to James, but also to themselves that they would become better people. After their promise to change, James suggested a way for them to make their commitment real. He invited Rick, Tom, and Stephen to participate in some community activities that he had been organizing for a long time: charity programs, support for the poor, and efforts to connect the diverse communities in the city. On the first day, all three joined James at a temporary shelter for the homeless and struggling families. Most of the people there were Black or immigrants, people Rick, Tom, and Stephen had never had much sympathy for in the past. But today, as they saw the weary faces and hopeful eyes, they felt their hearts stir. James introduced each of the residents to the officers, and they listened to the heartbreaking stories they had never paid attention to before. A single mother spoke about the hardships of raising 3 young children, working multiple tough jobs to make ends meet. An elderly man shared his memories of war and the emotional scars he carried for life. Each story was a piece of a life that the 3 officers had never truly understood before. Rick quietly offered his hand to help an old man organize his belongings. He looked into the man's eyes and saw an immense gratitude that made him feel lighter and warmer inside. He realized that compassion wasn't something grand but could be as simple as small yet meaningful acts. Tom and Stephen joined in distributing food to the homeless. When those who came to receive food smiled and thanked them, they felt like they were truly contributing to making life better. They felt a connection, not out of duty or obligation, but from genuine sincerity. Day by day, James and the 3 officers gradually became close friends. They organized community support activities together, helped those in need, and shared stories about their lives, families, and dreams. Each evening after their activities were done, they would sit together, talking and discussing the lessons they had learned. James shared his profound experiences from his work and spoke about the importance of human connection, regardless of skin color or background. Rick openly admitted that these activities had completely changed his perspective. "I used to think that Black people and immigrants were a burden on society, but now I understand that everyone has their own circumstances and is trying to live a better life each day," Rick shared. Tom and Stephen also felt their hearts fill with connection. They began to understand that compassion wasn't just words. It required empathy and action. Each of them realized that they had a responsibility to help build a united community without discrimination. James was happy to see his friends changing day by day. He knew that change couldn't happen overnight, but he believed that with what they had experienced and the lessons they had learned, they would become an inspiration to others. After weeks of participating in community activities and learning from James, the 3 officers felt like they were no longer the same people. They began changing from within, no longer driven by prejudice and racism, They understood that their job was not just about enforcing the law but also about protecting the rights and dignity of everyone, regardless of skin color or background. On their first day back at work after their experiences with James, Rick, Tom, and Stephen entered the police station with a completely new mindset. They saw the injustices they had overlooked or even unknowingly contributed to before. They realized that within the police force, there were colleagues who shared the same racist attitudes they once had. Rick took the initiative to talk to his colleagues, sharing what he had learned from James and from the people in the community. He did not hesitate to express his new views and encouraged others to change. He said, "We are protectors of the law, but that doesn't mean we have the right to judge someone based on their skin color. Every person deserves to be treated fairly and with respect." Tom and Stephen followed Rick's lead. Inspiring those around them, they organized discussions and invited community members to share the hardships they had faced. Through these conversations, they helped their colleagues better understand the importance of compassion and mutual respect. Changing from within was the most challenging part, but all three officers were determined to make it happen. They knew that to truly create a fair and united working environment, they needed to eliminate prejudice and work together to promote understanding and respect. The changes in Rick, Tom, and Stephen inspired not only those around them but the entire community. People began to see a friendly and respectful police force, no longer officers who carried prejudice and bias. And all of this was thanks to the compassion and patience of James, who had taken the time to help them realize the true values of life. As this chapter ended, the three officers realized that life was not just about work and enforcing the law. It was also about protecting moral values and building a united community full of love and respect. They promised themselves that they would never go back to their old selves and that they would carry love and compassion within them for the rest of their lives. After weeks of working together in community activities, James, Rick, Tom, and Stephen became more than just teammates. They truly became close friends. Their friendship wasn't something that stemmed from a single night of meeting, but rather the result of a journey spent learning together, understanding one another, and going through hardships and genuine moments together. One afternoon, after finishing a charity event at the local church, the four of them decided to sit down at a small cafe. The atmosphere was light and warm. Rick looked at James, giving him a sincere smile. "I never thought that one day we would be sitting here, drinking coffee and laughing together. James, you didn't just help me change. You taught me what compassion really means." James smiled kindly, placing his hand on Rick's shoulder. "Sometimes, the most miraculous things come from the simplest acts. I believe that anyone can change if they're willing to open their hearts and reflect on themselves." Tom and Stephen couldn't hold back their emotions either. Tom recalled the early days when he was still doubtful and wary of James. But now, everything was completely different. "You know, James, I used to think that life was a battle between right and wrong, black and white, but now I understand that there are many shades in between, and compassion is the key to coexisting together." Stephen nodded in agreement and added, "I once thought I had the right to judge others, but now I realize that everything I knew was just the surface. Thanks to you, I understand that we need to look deeper into each other." The conversation continued, and they laughed and shared stories about family, hobbies, and the little things in life. James talked about his wife and children and shared cherished memories. Rick, Tom, and Stephen also opened up about their families, things they hadn't shared with others before. Gradually, they became friends not only in their work but also in life. Their friendship was a testament to change, a proof that humanity can overcome all barriers. Over time, Rick, Tom, and Stephen did not stop at merely changing themselves. They gradually became strong allies in the fight against racism and injustice, not only within the police force but also in the community. Back at the police station, Rick, who had once been one of the strongest proponents of racist attitudes, now became a fierce advocate for justice. He often organized discussions, inviting colleagues to join in conversations about prejudice and the importance of building a harmonious work environment. Once, when a colleague made a derogatory comment about black people. Rick stood up, looked the person in the eye, and said, "We are protectors of justice. Justice has no room for discrimination and hatred. We need not only to be right by the law but also to be just in how we treat others." Rick's words left many colleagues stunned and thoughtful. He had once been a leader in judgment and discrimination, but now he was the first to stand up for the right values. His transformation not only impacted those around him but also became a powerful source of inspiration for others. Tom and Stephen did not hesitate to express their views either. They began to speak up whenever they saw injustice and were unafraid to confront those with discriminatory beliefs. They believed that if they did not act, everything they and James had gone through would be meaningless. James saw these changes and felt immense pride in his heart. He knew that by becoming allies in the fight against discrimination, Rick, Tom, and Stephen were not only helping those who were hurt but also making themselves better people. One day, as the four of them sat together after a community meeting, James smiled gently and said, "Do you know, the greatest lesson I've learned in life is that forgiveness and love can change everything. It's because of these that I didn't give up. And because of them, we have what we have today." Rick nodded, reflecting on the days when he lived in hatred and prejudice. "James, you've taught me that forgiveness is not weakness, it's strength. Because of you, I understand that forgiving isn't about helping others, it's about helping oneself." Tom and Stephen were also deeply moved. Tom said, "You showed us that no matter how full of mistakes the past may be, if we are willing to change, we can become better people." Stephen smiled, adding, "I used to think that a strong police officer was someone who never hesitated in dealing with criminals. But now I understand that a truly strong officer is one who puts humanity first, treats people fairly, and doesn't let prejudice cloud their judgment." James gently placed his hand on each of their shoulders, feeling the sincerity in their words. He knew that their journey would still be long, but he believed that they were ready to face any challenge to uphold the values they had learned. One beautiful day, the four of them decided to return to the neighborhood where they had first met. It was a journey filled with memories and hope, a place where they had once confronted each other but later learned to understand and appreciate one another. James stopped in front of his house, looking around with a satisfied smile. He remembered that day, when the three officers had broken in without permission and questioned him with suspicion. But now, they had become friends, reliable allies in the journey to build a united community. Rick stepped next to James, gently patting him on the shoulder, and said, "James, I want to thank you for everything. You didn't just help me change, you helped me become a better person. You've shown me that love and forgiveness can break down any barrier." Tom and Stephen joined them, also expressing their gratitude to James. They knew that without James, they would have remained trapped in the blindness of prejudice and hatred. But now, thanks to him, they had been able to break through those barriers and see life with a more open heart. James smiled, looking at his three friends with pride. "You have changed yourselves, and that's what I value the most. I believe that no matter how tough the future may be, you will always uphold the values we have learned today." They stood there, four people with different pasts and backgrounds, yet sharing the same goal: building a better world. A world without discrimination or prejudice, filled only with love and fairness. That day, under the bright sunlight, the four of them clasped hands, promising to continue down the path they had chosen, to protect justice and the dignity of every person. Regardless of skin color or background, they vowed to be officers who not only uphold the law but also protect the highest human values. The future ahead of them was a long journey, but they were not afraid, because they knew that, with love and compassion as their guide, they would always find a way, even in the toughest of times.